Welcome to the Unlist. Today I want to talk a little bit about iteration versus imitation. I want to talk about clones versus things that are technically not attempts to fully copy something, but attempts to do a take on a theme and compete against something in earnest. I feel like a lot of people in the online fragrance community, they get these two things confused. And there's a general mindset that anything that smells similar to anything else is automatically a dupe, a clone, a sham, a charade, some sort of bad faith offering. And I think some of that is really just indicative of the low trust society we have now. A society where everything is dog eat dog and self oriented, and we live in a world with corporations and billionaires and exploitation everywhere you turn. So people just automatically assume the worst of everyone and everything around them. Therefore, anything that smells like something else that they already know is good has to be some sort of, like I said, some sort of attempt to part a fool with their money. And that's just not the case, because if that was the case, there would be so many fewer legitimate fragrances on the market and a vast ocean of clones, because there are so many perfumes, just like there are so many films and so many pieces of music and other forms of artistic endeavor, whether they're made for sale or not. Like, perfumes are clearly made to turn a profit. They're not just artistic expressions without a dollar value assigned to them. But there are a lot of things that are iterative, that are in some ways imitation. Yes, they're imitating something, but they're trying to either add to the conversation or they're trying to offer an alternative to something. Like, they're trying to say that we think we can do it better than the thing that we're basically iterating on, right? And that's different, fundamentally different from, well, we're just going to copy this one for one because we want to take their money. We want to take whatever this is, its popularity, whatever kind of money it makes, sales wise, and we want to take it and offer basically the closest facsimile we can and then sell it for less money or more money in some cases. People also seem to forget that clones go both ways. It's a two-way street. It's not always a cheap nickel dime fragrance with 2-bit materials trying to copy a $600 Raja Dove or Creed or something. There are many cases where you have the Creeds and the Raja Doves actually imitating a cheaper fragrance. In Creed's case, it's usually because it's the same perfumer. Obviously, we know the history. Creed had Pierre Bourdon for a long time as a ghost perfumer, and he would take mods from the same general composition, and whatever mod was given to the design house to put out a fragrance, Creed would take one of the others and then make it up market, finesse it a bit, move it up market. So is it really, at that point, is it cloning when you're just using your own work? Right? Different forms of your own work, different takes. But in other cases, though, it's an upmarket brand saying we can repackage this and sell it for 10 times more, right? Because we have the prestige, Veblen goods, where the price of the item is the desirability itself. I know it's a bit of a paradox. Because it's expensive, it's more desirable. And because it's more desirable, it's expensive. It's a feedback loop that has circular logic and that has no real beginning or end. And that's why you get $2,000 pairs of jeans with holes in the knees. Right, guys? Right. So, anyway, to help you guys understand the not so subtle nuance between iterative perfumes and actual imitation, I'm going to show you some actual clones. And then I'm going to show you some things that are what I call in the wheelhouse of other perfumes, but are not clones. And then I will show you some things that are kind of one-footed, one foot out. You could argue they were clones. You could argue they were an attempt to make a cheaper or more expensive version of something, but they do have subtle differences that make it not necessarily a clone to some people. So we're going to play this whole thing through. First things first, let's get on with the actual clones, the things that are clearly meant to be the same as something else. So I think one of the most obvious examples I can give you is, you can see it right here. It's right in view of the camera. So without further ado, this is the big one, the one that most of you are going to automatically point out. It is the age-old Aventus, and yes, this is a real bottle of Creed Aventus, clearly. You know, Aventus versus probably the most popular and well-known clone of Aventus on planet Earth, and that is Club de Nuit Intense, the original Eau de Toilette, not any of the Eau de Parfums or Parfums or whatever. They made 50 million versions of this thing. We're talking about the original one, the one that was, and probably still is, $25. Most retailers that sell it sell the brand. Now, you know, with this, the intent was to undercut. And it's a very obvious intent, very reasonable intent. When I got this bottle, 2017, see what there's even a batch code on the bottle. I think it's only, with these older ones, I think it was only on the box, not stamped on the bottle. I'm not the expert on this. I don't really care. This one bottle will be a lifetime supply for me anyway. But yeah, there's no actual code printed on the bottle anywhere. It's going to be on the box, so it's whatever. When I bought this in 2017, it was already too expensive, but then it was I want to say Creed was selling retail somewhere 400, 425, and then pre-pandemic it was $475, pushing $500. And now I think a 100 ml bottle of Aventus is $6 or $6.25. They just keep adding 10, 15%, 20%. Some years it fluctuates to the price every year, and it's that Veblen's goods concept. It has nothing to do with how good this smells. It has nothing to do with the actual perfume. It only has to do with the name Creed and the quote-unquote flex that represents to people who care about, ostentatious displays of wealth. But that's also a double-edged sword, because you kind of have to be wealthy to know what a display of wealth is, because a lot of the average Joes still don't quite know what Creed is. You go to poor cities and poor towns all across the U.S., they think Creed is just the rock band, right? They think, "Can you take me higher?" when you say Creed. That's what they think. Or the movies, right? That's what they think. They don't think about this. So, but obviously, it's a good smelling perfume, and I can't argue that Creed is one of those if you know kind of brands. They're definitely bigger than that now, but they're still not on levels of Chanel and Dior, because even poor people know what those are, right? Even poor folks know what Chanel is. But Creed's not quite there yet. So the market to duplicate that fragrance for a much lower price point, that's been around for a while. Even hell, this came out in 2000 and I think 15 or 16. So we're talking just 5 years into Aventus. and this popped out. So clearly the demand was there, and Armaf, being a Middle Eastern brand, a Middle Eastern brand that's not afraid to spend a bit of money, because even though this, some will argue, does not smell as quality as the actual Aventus, this smells every bit as good as any other designer I've had. So any $60, $80 bottle of designer juice, this smells just as good as. I kind of call the Club de Nuit range, I kind of call them the Bogart of Creeds. So like, if we lived in a different reality where Creed was actually Jacques Bogart, like that price point, you know, one man show, stuff like that, what would those perfumes be like? If you were to make Creeds at a Bogart price point, how would they smell? And I'm like, here's the answer. This is your Bogart Creed right here. The same goes for their dupe of Milsim Imperial, their dupe of Silver Mountain Water. And the names give it away, guys. The names, holy cow, the names just give it away. There's just no way you could be confused. There's no way you could be deceived into thinking this is anything other than a cologne. I mean, come on. I'll show you. Here. Back here, yeah. Okay, here we go. So, yeah, here we go. Okay, so doesn't get more obvious than this. Let me show you. Milsim Imperial, gold label. Milestone, gold bottle. They even have the alliteration there, Milsim Milestone. Yeah, they are playing it very close to the chest here, guys. So that's a clone. Doesn't want to go back. There we go. There we go. You can do it. You in there. That bottle didn't want to go back for some reason, but I got it in there. Yeah, there we go. So that's a clone. That is a clone. Another very popular example of a clone would be La Venture by Al Haramain. I have that sample over here somewhere. I can dig it out for you later. Some not so obvious examples of clones. Here's where it gets a little more intriguing. Yeah, this is a good example. Yeah, here we go. Original bottle of Tommy Cologne. And this, by the way, is a deep vintage original 90s bottle. You can tell by the matte finish on the cap, because the newer bottles, like this, newer bottles have a chrome cap. And the newest ones have black letters. The letters are black on the newest ones. But this is a middle period bottle, so it's got the older style letters, but the chrome cap, and it's got the white label. You've got the quote-unquote deep vintage original Tommy Hilfiger from the 90s. You get this matte Almost looks like rose gold, sort of like this matte cap. And then you get the big old American flag, Tommy Hilfiger logo on the bottom, just like that. Made in the USA, right? Big honkin' chonkin' sprayer, because these were actually Estee Lauder bottles. My point is, this is a clone of this. Not the newer version of the fragrance, the older version, which is a little bit heavier, a little bit rounder, a little bit richer. The newer ones, which are still good, push more towards cologne, drier, crisper, sharper smell. These older ones were a bit heavier, and they had monstrous performance. Let me tell you, this stuff is nuclear. So obviously, you can't get this version of the fragrance anymore. You can only get the newer one, which is a little bit lighter, like I said. And there are people who want that heavier, early Tommy Hilfiger cologne style. So leave it to Montal to figure out that formula under chromatography and reproduce it. Now, I will argue that this is not 100% a clone, because when you're cloning, if you will, when you're cloning the patina and age, that can sometimes happen with an older fragrance, because this came out in the late 2000s, this came out in the 90s. You're cloning a 10-year-old bottle, and you're cloning something that may have already experienced some oxidation. So there's a bit of artistic license with this too. When I smell this, it's a bit more geranium in here, not as much geranium in the original Tommy. It also feels a bit more thick, a little more resinous. You can tell that they put a little oomph in the base, a little more patchouli going on. So while I still want to call it a clone, I want to say it's a little more creative license, even though it's still like 95% this older bottle. New ones, like I said, not so much. If you bought a new bottle of this, you wouldn't think they're the same, but if you have this older bottle, you'll definitely see it. For sure you'll see it. So, and that one is called Fougères Marine by Montal. So if you don't want to hunt down an ancient, because 94 is 30 years ago. So if you don't want to hunt down a 30-year-old bottle of Tommy Hilfiger, then just get that Montal. Save yourself some time, save yourself some money. It's pretty much what I do. I mean, I have that vintage bottle because I do want to use it, but knowing what I know now, I'm just going to reach for that Montal if I want that kind of smell, at least for right now. So now, let's talk about this little guy right here. There was a big to-do made about this, because this is a Olivier Pichot fragrance. He is unfortunately not with us anymore, but this fragrance was cited to be like a 90% same as Abercrombie & Fitch Fierce, and Christophe Laudemel put the perfume under gas chromatography and isolated the materials between this and Fierce to prove his point. And it's another gray area where you could say it's a clone of Fierce because the materials are like 90% the same. But there again, the brief was probably extremely specific. Mont Blanc probably said, we want our version of Fierce, but we want it a bit more this and a bit less that, and other key twists and changes. So I prefer the Legend over the Fierce because the Legend has more of a mossy base. Even though it's synthetic, it's Varanis, it's Evernal. It's got a mossier base, and it feels just slightly heavier and more serious. Still a big mall fragrance, clearly, you know, still a youthful scent, but a bit more gravitas in this version. So I would wear this over the Abs bottle, and but yeah, you could call it a clone. It's very, very much very similar. Now, fragrances that are not clones. This one, right here. And of course, all the frag bros and all the Muppets that hang out on Fragrantica and all their two brain cells that they rub together while they argue about stuff and say they have bottles for sale in the review section and point thumbs down at people, say this guy's an idiot or this guy above me's a jerk. And again, they act like children over there. That's why I don't hang out there. But those people will tell you up and down that this is a clone of Aventus. And I don't know, man. I've owned Aventus for long enough, and I've smelled different versions of it, and when I smell this, like, I can get the similarities, but there's just so much different stuff in this fragrance. I mean, for one, the Akigala wood in this is very much noticeable, and since I'm aware of Bois Imperial, right? Since I wear Bois Imperial, I'm very, very acquainted with Akigala wood and how it smells. There's a lot of Akigala wood in this. There is vetiver in this. There is sage, sclerion in this. There are a whole lot of things in this that are not in Creed Aventus. Okay? No sclerion, no Akigala wood. Okay? I don't get any of that. I don't get vetiver in Aventus. I get all those things in this. I do not get pineapple in this. Okay? Maybe there's a little bit of amyl allyl glycolate, maybe a tiny bit, but it is not shaped into a pineapple note like it is in Aventus, okay? It's not. So I tell people, if you want like a Aventus Sport, a drier, more masculine, more fit for fight kind of Aventus, stripped down, bare bones, hot rodded, this is what you want. It is an iteration on a style. I could take you back even further. You could really, really, really go all the way back to 1991. And 1991 will show you the birth of the style that would become Aventus years later in this little fragrance right here. This Giacomo Anthracite Pour L'Homme. People forget about this fragrance. I mean, it's got a cheap plastic cap, so it's easy to forget about, but this has the same pineapple note, the amyl glycolate note, and it's got some of the other tones. It has birch in it. It has that smokiness from birch. It has patchouli. But the big difference between the two is this is built on a fougere base. So it's built on a base of tonka, of oak moss, of clary sage. Okay. It's got that fruity floral opening and the birch tar smoke that all the Aventus bros like. But this came out before Aventus ever existed, and beyond that opening section, like I said, the rest of the fragrance goes in a completely different direction. So you could really pitch the argument that maybe Aventus stole something from this fragrance, because by 2010, this was forgotten about. You know, we're talking almost 20 years later, this was almost forgotten about. So they could get away with pinching some of the ideas from this obscure 90s floral fougere thing that I love it a lot. I love it a lot, but it's never going to be, this is never going to be a really highly spoken of fragrance, not to anybody. So, there you go. And, obviously, other examples of things that are not clones. This fragrance, and basically every other fresh fougere that came out in its wake that tries to copy the style, but change something, add something, take something away, make it their own. There are so many, so many iterations on this fragrance that came out in the wake of its success. And here's one of the more notable ones. So, you like Drakkar Noir, I like Drakkar Noir. I think safe to say we all like this fragrance. It's been out for 40 years now. It's a good fragrance, 42 years technically. And here is Duc de Vervins from 1985, relaunched in 91. Much more. This has much more lemon, much more verbena. I love lemon verbena in this. It's very, very nice. Luca Turin didn't like this so much. Clearly, he had a bone to pick with Houpagat for releasing this. I can respect his opinion, but I don't agree with it. I love this stuff. I don't care. If that makes me a man of poor taste, then I will be a man of poor taste, and I will smell good, and you can just mind your business. That's all I will say on that. Not a clone. Clearly not a clone. You can also lump Taxi by Coffin Lux from 84. You can lump Xerius by Givenchy from 86 in there. You can stick Alain Delon Plus in there from 88. You can stick Caesar's Legendary Cologne in there, also from 88. You can stick Gucci Nobile in there, also from 88. You can stick Pancaldi Concentrate in there from 89. You can stick Avon Ever After from 1990 in there. California for Men by Jacqueline Smith. Another one that could be put in that category of all iterations on that Drakkar Noir style. There are so many. Now, I do have an actual clone, though. You guys want to smell an actual clone? An actual clone of Drakkar Noir? It would be this. Lomani Pour-Homme from 1987. But you have to bear in mind that this is a very early clone. And because it's a very early clone, it's not very accurate. It's actually so inaccurate that it doesn't smell like a clone. So when you clone something so wrong, you accidentally make an original fragrance. Which is funny because like the Lomani slogan is, very original. Their whole thing is our fragrances are so original. They're just super duper original. Nothing else exists like them. They're all clones. Every Lomani fragrance is a clone of something. You just have to remember that back in the 80s, they weren't going to spend a bunch of money on gas chromatography. The technology was not as cheaply available back then. Mass spec analysis was also not very easy to come by. So if you were going to clone something, you just had to use the old honker. You had to use your nose. So that meant the accuracy is kind of negligible. And that's why this, even though it's meant to be a clone, ends up smelling more like just a competitor. Because there's enough differences that make it seem like it's not a direct copy. You could pitch a similar argument to Canois versus Clubman Pinot. Clubman Pinot was clearly trying to imitate Canois for much less money. There were also a lot of fragrances that copied Paco Rabanne. I think I've gone over a bunch of those. Paco Rabanne itself was also sort of an iteration on Sir Irish Moss and on the Irish Spring bar soap. Paco Rabanne comes out and basically offers a more luxurious, more refined version of that scent profile in a fancy French bottle by way of Spanish house. Then you would have all of the other things that would come out in its wake. Bogart Signature, aka Bogart Eau de Toilette, the Worth Pour Homme, the Roger and Goulet L'Homme, all those different things, very similar to, but not clones, not clones. So I think you guys have a pretty good idea now of what's a clone and what's just, again, an inspired take, because every single aldehyde floral chypre that came out in the wake of Chanel No. 5 from 1921, so everything from Joy to Kalesh to God knows what, Topaz by Avon, they are not all clones of Chanel No. 5. That is just absurd. So whenever I hear people in the all-night fragrance community say that X is a clone of Y, and that, like, because it smells partly the same, it smells similar to, oh, it's a clone. Why is it a clone? Because it has a pineapple note, or because it has whatever. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. A lot of things smell very similar, clearly. You know, Prada Luna Rossa Carbon smells similar to Dior Sauvage. Not a clone, though. There are significant differences. You just need to have a more nuanced sense of smell to better understand those differences, so that someone like me doesn't have to constantly spell it out for you. This has been the On List. Thanks for watching.